And I'm going to share the screen. Share screen. Come on, here we go. Okay, so today's, I don't know if you had a look at the notes, but it was about our muscles and our skeleton, our bones. So let's go. So what do we have? As you know, we do have muscles because we can move around. And there are three types. We have what are called skeletal, the smooth, and the cardio. And they're quite different. Their structure is quite different. We have bones and different sorts of bones. And I'll go into detail later. We have connective tissues, which hold us together. And these include the tendons, the ligaments, and the cartilage. And most people have no idea. They hear the words, but they don't know what they are. So my job today is to make you informed in this area. Now, I don't know if you know, we actually have 640 skeletal muscles in our bodies. That's a lot. And every muscle is almost every muscle has a pair. And a pair means when one side moves, the other one relaxes, and vice versa. And then we have actually, sorry, I should, well, that's the next bit, the pairs, but the identical bilateral. So if you've got something on the right side of the body, you've got the same sort of thing on the left. So it's much the same. Now, the skeletal muscles don't work on their own. They actually have to be attached to something. So they're attached to the bones, but not directly. They're attached to tendons. And I'll explain the difference between different things here shortly. So every muscle of all of those has thousands of fibers which are bundled together, and then they contract together. The organization of the whole thing, the way it's arranged, it looks like it's striped. And because of the way they look, they call the muscles that move us are called striated. They're striped. And I'll show you pictures, which I'm sure you've seen if you looked at what I said to you yesterday. So to move, we need striated muscles, the skeletal muscles. Either name's good because the skeletal muscle, the striated muscles are what they look like. The skeletal muscles is what they're attached to and what they move. So it's the same thing, different name. So when with these, to be able to move, we need to be able to move in one direction and then move in. If I move my hand there, I need to be able to move it back again. And all this is because of the way the different groups of muscles are set up in the body, and every part of the body has got these sorts of pairs. Now, and they are totally voluntary. You have the choice of moving them or not moving them. And that doesn't apply to the other forms of muscles. And so you have ultimate control of your own body, unless, of course, there's a medical issue of some sort. And these are, as I said, the other two forms of muscles can't do that. So this is basically what they look like under a microscope, and they're striped. So there are two sorts of microfilaments. They're very small, but very strong. And one of them is called actin. And it's made up of what are called myo means muscle, and fibrils, strands. And they're about 7 nanometers in diameter. Now, a nanometer is if you have a millimeter, it's a thousandth. A nanometer is hang on a minute, 10 to the minus 9. So it's 1,000 millionths of a millimeter, of a meter, 1,000 millionths. So a millionth of a millimeter. So if you imagine the size of a millimeter, the thousandths of that is 7,000. Okay, so very, very small. Yeah, and they're very fast. But all insects, all flying things use these sorts of muscles because they keep moving and they're controllable. Now, this actin allows cell motility. Motility means the capacity to be mobile. And so, for example, in sperm, there's a tail that flashes by. And again, it's very fine. You know how small the sperm are. You can't see with the naked eye, but they each have these actin fibers which alternate movement so they can swim along where they have to go. And they also divide and within when there's cell division during mitosis and meiosis, which I'm not touching today, that's another talk. But during the process of mitosis and meiosis, the chromosomes are separated and moved, and there are fine fibers to pull them. And guess what those fine fibers are? Actin. So they're all over the body. And then the second type of fiber is the myosin. So we have actin and we have myosin. It's a long molecule. And what it does, it converts ATP, which every time I mention it a lot, it's adenosine triphosphate, and the third phosphate bond it's called a high energy bond. So this carries energy into a system, releases it, and this myosin then contracts. Okay, it's all part of the system, and it has what are called mechanical energy. And mechanical means it's moving. So, okay, this is sort of the diagram for this. There are other parts to it which I should mention, but I don't expect you to remember too much of this. So there's a thing called the sarcolemma, and I'll show you. It's here. It's the covering of this fiber, these fibers here, and it's from the Greek of flesh. And lemma, sorry, the sarco is, and lemma is the sheath around it. So it holds a stack of these fibers that I mentioned, and it's a sort of it basically, that's probably the easiest way to learn. It covers it, and this is what it looks like side on. Within these group of fibers covered by the sarcolemma, you see little things here, which are the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria supply ATP to the system so it can contract. And of course, it needs glucose, so it must have a blood supply to bring the glucose, so ATP can be converted. So, and then you've got another area called the cytoplasmic reticulum, and that's a store of calcium inside the system because it can't contract. These fibers can't contract without calcium. So there's a storage area there. So So what we have here is the basic fiber made of many fibers. Then it's surrounded by a sarcolemma, and then around that there's this sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now, if you look carefully here, you will see the red fibers, if you like, and they stop, and there's a blank area, and like that. So when you look at it, it looks like it's got stripes. Okay, and that's why it's called striated muscle. And we have full control of these. So here's another diagram. I don't know why it's looking a bit fuzzy. It looked all right yesterday when I looked at it. But basically, where these things are, these stripes, you see this is how it contracts. It has little movable elements which move along the gray, what's shown as gray here, along here. So what it does, it brings these two gray bits together, and the fibers contract, and then the muscle moves. So the whole thing becomes shorter. Okay, so if you can imagine moving your arm close to your head or wherever, everything's done by these series of muscles. So when these contract by bringing everything together, the muscles move. Sorry, the bones move. So actin and myosin. Actin is the thin one. Myosin is the thick one, and they move across each other, and they just shorten the muscle. But it's all controlled from the brain by a series of nerves. Because everything you do in this regard is voluntary. So you have to actually tell it to do something. Now, the energy for all this, as I mentioned before, is ATP. And of course, without calcium, it can't happen either. So there's a big store of calcium inside the muscles for this purpose. And ATP is continuously replenished as well. When a nerve signal is reduced or it stops completely, then the fibers, or immediately these fibers here, relax, and they separate, and the muscles relax. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about anything so far?
Yeah, I've never understood how ATP works.
ATP doesn't actually work. ATP is a chemical, if you like, a molecule, and it's made up of three parts. The A stands for adenosine, which is a molecule very similar to adenine, which is part of our DNA. Okay, so it's just a similarity. And then you've got three phosphate molecules, and each phosphate is a phosphorus with 4 oxygen, PO4. The third one and the second one have a high energy bond, which can easily be broken. And by breaking it, energy is then transferred from this ATP to whatever it's doing, like here. So it makes these little gauges, I'll show you in a minute, move along. And then as soon as that happens, if there's enough energy in store elsewhere, and this is where the calcium comes in, the third phosphate is rejoined to the second one, and the high energy bond is replaced. So we don't run out of energy. It continues to be broken. The bond is broken. The energy is transferred to where it's right next to it. The thing does its job, and it's continuous. Now, for example, if you're shopping and you pick up a bag and your fingers are holding it, now your fingers will hold the bag till you get home or till you get to the car or whatever. You don't run out of energy at any time, and you're holding the bag. And as soon as you decide to put the bag down, then those muscles relax. The muscles won't relax until you tell them to, unless, for example, you're carrying a 50-kilogram bag and you may not be able to pick it up, but if you can't hold it for long. Does that make sense, Greg?
Sort of. The thing I don't understand is what the energy is. What does you say it's a transfer of energy?
Yep.
Is how does that work? The energy part of it.
At the moment, I can't answer that. I will make a note. ATP heat transfer question mark. I will get back to you on that.
That's the bit I never understood. I understood that it contained energy or was able to transfer energy, but how is that done? Yeah.
I don't know. And there's a lot I don't know. I'm willing to accept that.
Suggest something.
Sure.
When you say energy transfer, what happened basically is a molecule is being broken and it release heat or electricity or both. And that is impact other molecule that cause the action. For example, in this particular case, the energy is a retraction or the contraction of the particular other
fibers.
molecule.
Yeah, but again, the nitty-gritty of it is what Greg's asking, and anyway, I'll do some research. Where am I up to? I'll go to the next page, I think. Okay, so we have, as I said, the work in pairs. So if you're going to bend your arm, as in this diagram, the one that is, this one shows a tricep. Oh no, let's do this one. The bicep contracts. Okay, so you're lifting your arm. So that one is the one that's working, and that's called the agonist. And the opposite one, the triceps, they are relaxing. Hang on, let me think. I've got a blank. There's a condition. There's a disease, a bacterial disease. Dogs carry it. Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, they
Rabies.
Rabies. Thank you. I've got a blank. I'm getting old, you know. Rabies has what it does. It causes all muscles, to contract simultaneously, not as agonists and antagonists, but they all contract, and the muscles actually are so strong they will actually snap the bones. Yes, not good. So once you've lifted your arm up like this and the biceps are contracted, to go the other way, the triceps then contract. They become the agonists, and the biceps the antagonist, the opposite one. So that's but that's the same right throughout the body. And of course they all work together. So this is what happens. The ATP is that I mentioned before. When the third phosphate it breaks away, it releases the energy. It releases to this thing called the myosin head. Remember, myosin is one of the sections of one of the fibers. So the green one here it's a filament. It's called actin. Calcium's floating around everywhere. There's a cross bridge between these guys, and and as soon as the third phosphate breaks, they're attached, and the third, and the energy moves to this head, and what it does, it bends, but because it's attached to the actin fiber, it moves the fiber, in this case, to the left. You can see how it's going from straight to folded. Yeah, and this is shown with the ATP there. Then once but it's only instantaneous, and then it relaxes, and ATP and ADP and the phosphate join up, and they become ATP again, and the whole thing just keeps going. So by moving this fiber across by these heads, you get the movement of the fibers across each other. And we're talking about huge numbers of these things simultaneously and at the same time. So so this, okay, it needs that, and it's a very short little video clip which I'll show you. Okay.
Here at Wimbledon, it is. It's
Where is
finals
it?
day now. Finals day. Now, we've been coming here for the last 15 years. Today, I'm rooting for Djokovic. You're going.
The body's skeletal muscles are attached to bones and contract to help the body move. To better understand how skeletal muscle does that job, let's look at its structure using the new skeletal muscle microanatomy model in Human Anatomy Atlas 2022+. Skeletal muscles are composed of bundles of muscle fibers. These bundles are called fascicles. Each muscle fiber is a long, cylindrical cell containing multiple myofibrils, which are further divided into sarcomeres, or chains of thick and thin protein filaments. The myofibrils of each muscle fiber are surrounded by a special cell membrane called a sarcolemma. The mitochondria inside muscle fibers generate the ATP required for muscle contraction. A skeletal muscle fiber contracts when it receives a signal from a motor neuron. The motor neuron uses acetylcholine to initiate the series of reactions that causes the actin and myosin protein filaments to slide across each other, shortening the muscle. Want to learn more about the structure of muscles and how they move the body? WebSuite has all the 3D gross and microanatomy models you need, as well as a library of physiology animations.
Okay. Share screen, and we're up to okay, so that I hope gave you an idea of the movement. Anyway, you've got this link, you can watch it umpteen times. Here's another version of it, the 2D representation where the fibers move across each other, and these fibers are pulled across. The gray ones are pulled across by the little head on the whatever color that is, brown. And this is a 3D representation. Now, the tendons are actually attached. They actually attach the muscle fibers to the bone, and that's done by a thing called a tendon. Very, very tough, and it's not. It doesn't stretch at all, because otherwise you wouldn't get your bones moving properly. Or the old name for it is sinew. So it's very tough. it's called connective tissue, because it connects muscles to bones and muscles to muscles, and they're actually an extension of that is the this covering of the actual muscle fibers, which are within these groupings like that. Now the tendons do have incredible attention capacity, strength, and so you've got things like grasshoppers, for example, which can jump many times their height, and it's these tendons that have this capacity to be stretched a tiny bit in the grasshopper, and then it slams closed, and up it goes. So that's it's the same sort of tendon we have, but it's slightly different. Very similar, but very. So, yeah. Anyway, so the tendons in us really don't stretch, and the muscle, when it contracts, it produces a pulling force. When you pull things, so it always when the muscle contracts, when it relaxes, it doesn't actually have any force attached to it. Now the tendons themselves, this is a couple of things. I just threw this in so that people don't really understand the difference. Sprains and strains, what's the difference? So a strain is an injury to a muscle or a tendon. A sprain is an injury to ligaments and capsules at joints. So the ligaments join bone to bone. So, for example, you all have heard of, athletes, footy players, the LAC, the
ACL.
in the knee, you've got anterior, not ALC, anterior
ACL.
Oh, I snapped mine many years ago. I can tell you it's quite painful too. The anterior cruciate ligament, and it's called cruciate because it looks like a cross, and it holds. There are two of them, anterior and posterior, and they actually hold the knee in place. So the two ends, very, very tough tissue attached to the two bones, and so if there's an injury to the ligament, that's called a sprain. But if you injure the muscle or the tendon, that's a strain. So if we have two bones here, you have the ligaments there holding it this way, but with the knee, the ligaments are in the middle, in the cross. That's why they're called cruciates. So there's also fluid in there. So when the bones move, it doesn't grind, and that's called synovial fluid. It's a very special sort of liquid, and there's a membrane to stop it from leaking, I suppose. And it's and there are cells in there which actually keep the right amount of the fluid going. I don't know if there's anything else I need to tell you at this stage, but the other thing is the tendon in the knees. They have the cartilage inside there. Again, the knee is quite complicated. So if you do have a strain or a sprain, the sooner you treat it, the better. And the best is it's called arrest it, ice it, compress it, and elevate it. So the first aid people call it RICE: rest, ice, compression, elevate, and don't move it. Put ice on it, and then put a firm bandage and raise it so you don't get too much swelling in the joint. Okay, that's your first aid for the day. Now, smooth muscles, remember it's all about striated muscles, but these are involuntary. We have no control whatsoever of the smooth muscles, and they're non-striated. They don't look anything like that. And the whole bundle or the sheets of these smooth muscles, they act together. And this action, which happens together, is called a syncytium. And so they are found all over the body, and that they don't necessarily have the bilateral, the partners. So if we look, we have parts of our bodies are hollow. For example, the stomach, intestines, bladder, uterus, anus, penis, clitoris. There are muscles in there for some purpose. And the stomach, of course, is to churn, to mix what's in there. So it churns away. The intestine moves it. And it's very interesting, by the way, I just realized I didn't enter the esophagus, but if you swallow, and the same thing with all of them, when you swallow, there are two sets of muscles in the esophagus, round and long. And so the long muscle squeezes in and the round squeezes down. So the squeezing is moved down. So each section is is stimulated to squeeze and push whatever you've swallowed down into the stomach. And that once the squeeze has gone past the bit above it, it just relaxes. Sometimes you get a reflux where it comes from the stomach out. It's the same process, but in the opposite direction. And you really don't want it. Not very nice. Walls of passageways, arteries, veins, they all have, and in the whole circulatory system, they all have some muscle in their walls. Arteries, for example, even though the heart beats to be able to push the blood out, the muscle in the wall keeps squeezing the blood on, and then you can actually feel, when you feel your pulse, wherever you can feel it, is what you're feeling is the muscles and the blood moving past a particular point. In the lung, we have the urinary reproductive system. So as you can see, they're everywhere. The eyes, for example, to be able to move your eyes in any direction, each eye has 6 muscles. Excuse me. And so you can move up, down, sideways, in a circle, whatever you want to do. Ciliary muscles, different types of smooth muscles around. The ciliary muscles, I should say, is also the retina. Sorry. No. The pupil. If you look at some people with sort of fairly light colored eyes, you'll see it's circles and little lines radiating. What you're seeing there are smooth muscles. So when it's very bright, the muscles then contract. When it's a little bit darker, they relax and they get pulled. So what we have to realize here is that if you're going to be reading in bright sunshine for 10 minutes, an hour, whatever it might be, you can't allow these muscles in the pupil to relax. Otherwise, you'll be blinded with the extra light. So these guys do not get tired. Whereas if you're lifting weights or anything with skeletal muscles, they get tired pretty quickly. Others, for example, in the bladder, you don't want the bladder to release the urine because the muscle holding it tight to not, says, oh, I've had enough, I'm tired. It opens up. It will become a problem. Everybody urinating all over the place. If you need to go and have a crap, the feces won't come out until you tell those muscles you can relax now, and then out it comes. So it's all under very strict control. In the skin, we have muscles. In the base of every hair in our skin. Now, let me see. I'm sure you've seen birds or animals, furry animals, fluff their feathers up, fluff their hairs up. The end of a feather or the end of a hair in the skin, at the bottom of it, it's got a little muscle. And this muscle, when it's cold, is reacted, and it contracts, and it lifts the feather up, and it lifts the hair up, and so it then traps air. Air is trapped around the animal, and that's a very, very good form of insulation. Now, we have hairs, but the hairs aren't dense enough. There aren't enough of them to have, for us humans, to have this capacity to insulate. But we still do it. The muscles are still there. And that's what I call goosebumps. So every goosebump is one of those muscles contracting when you're cold. I'll notice here, but cold temperature or fear. Now, when you're scared, especially with animals, by doing that, they will appear bigger. And that's a useful thing when you're an animal. So smooth muscles, they don't have striations like we saw of cardiac and skeletal, but we haven't got to the cardiac yet. And these layers, they line, various organs, tubes, bodies. So we have them everywhere. Now, it's so important to realize that all these muscles, the smooth muscles, are not under voluntary control. We have no control, except, for example, to release the urine, to open up the anus. But that is a form of voluntary control, but they're the only ones that I can think of. And again, it needs calcium. It's a molecule which requires calcium for them to remain constricted. And then if you want to do something with that muscle, as I mentioned, have some sort of tiny bit of control, you're thinking about it, removes that calcium complex, and then it opens up. And then as soon as you stop, they contract again. The smooth muscles, again, shorten, the same sort of thing, but it's a little bit different structure. Now, when we talk about neural innervation, that is where the nerves come in and they send a message from the brain. So the innervation is where the muscle and the nerve meet. The signal comes from the brain and then goes into the muscle to do whatever has to be done. And it's through what's called the autonomic nervous system. It's a system we can't control, except for those two I mentioned. You may have heard of the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic. That's the autonomic, and they run us. They control everything: our heart rate, our breathing rate, our body temperature, whatever. It's all controlled subconsciously. The contractile, the state, how much control, how much contraction the smooth muscles have, is also can be controlled by hormones and other. Not all chemicals are hormones, but there are signals that they get. Now, the smooth muscles, the cells themselves, they have a cross bridging between the actin and the myosin, but they're different shape, different structure. They use the same set of muscle fibers, but it's a little bit different. And the important thing is because the way they're set up, they never tire, never. Compared to the skeletal muscles, of course. So what do they look like? They're in groups in the branch, as opposed to skeletal. They do not run parallel. They're actually quite different. Their cells are, the muscle cells are cigar shaped and tapered, very different, and they can contract and very strongly, much more strongly than the striated muscles, and hang on to that contraction. So how do they look? These are as you see, cigar shape will do, and there's a nucleus for each one. And within that area, you have mitochondria, these white with the little crissy-crossy things. They're the mitochondria, and they have these varicosities which supply the energy, a constant energy. Axon is a nerve fiber, and postganglionic is the ganglia in the spinal cord. So this is past that, so don't worry about that part. But they surround the smooth muscles, and these varicosities, these things supply the energy. Skeletal muscles we saw before, that's what they look like. They're striated. The smooth muscles are quite different, and these are actual microscopic photos. So that it doesn't have this like regimented structure. It's quite different. Let's go to the third one, unless there's some questions. Cardiac muscles, very different again. Also involuntary. Their job is to continuously and rhythmically contract and relax, and never ever stop. If they stop, well, you stop too. So the cells of the cardiac muscles are called cardiomyocytes. Okay, there's three words there. Cardio means heart, myo means muscle, cyte means cell. And or cardiac cells, if you like, but I just broke it up here. So they are uninucleated. You saw the others have multiple nuclei. They're cylindrical and they're elongated. So they apparently there's a faint cross striation which can be seen, but they never ever get fatigued. From the moment when we were embryos in our mum's uterus, and a group of cells started contracting, they contracted, and they never stopped until just before they bury us. so they don't get fatigued. They work basically to keep the heart pumping, and and it's controlled unconsciously. If we get stressed, the heart rate will increase, or if we try and relax, it will decrease, but it has nothing to do with our control of it. By the way, in the brain stem, which is the lower part of the brain, is where it's controlled from, and the hypothalamus in how can I tell you? You've heard of the pituitary. So if you take two knitting needles and push one between the eyes and one in the in the side region here, where they meet, it's a pituitary, and immediately above the pituitary, you've got the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus means it's under the thalamus, which is another part. So in that area, everything is controlled, and that sends messages to the bit in the brain stem at the back, and then from there it goes on. So people who break their necks may have a problem. And this is one feature that differentiates it from skeletal muscle. And they're specialized cells of this continuous beating within the system. There is some control from the brain, but if you took a heart out, it'll keep on beating so long as you feed it. And it's called a pacemaker cell. It's the group one. And there are two areas I'll get to. Okay, so the heart's electrical signals are myogenic. Myo is muscle, and they originate in the muscle, in the heart. And they are two nodes. They're the two pacemakers. And they generate the signals for the contraction of the upper part of the heart and the lower part of the heart. But it's done in a very, very incredible way. Now, there are two nodes. These are the two pacemakers. The SA node, or the SA pacemaker, if you like. SA stands for sinoatrial node. And it's in the atrium, the atria, the top part. And the SA node, it ensures that the atria contract simultaneously and pump the blood to the ventricles, the bottom bit, simultaneously. You can't have it any other way. So the right, there are some pictures coming up. So the right atrium, the top right chamber, pushes the contents into the right ventricle, which is the lower chamber, and the same on the left. So you have the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, the left ventricle. Now here's the SA node, sinoatrial node, and the atrioventricular node here. The SA node makes sure that the two chambers contract simultaneously. The AV node gets a signal from the SA node, but it's a delayed signal. It can't have all four chambers contracting simultaneously. So there's a delay between this signal from here, from the SA node, which sends signals to the left and the right here, and then a fraction, a second or so later, you get a signal here, and then the signals come down to the ventricle, and you can see the signals now going through. These, once it gets to the bottom, then moves across. And these little, these are little bundles of nerves called the bundles of His, H-I-S. Right, so I can stop it. So the AV node, atrioventricular node, it ensures that the ventricle, so the blood comes from the atrium to the ventricle, and that all contracts simultaneously. The right ventricle then pushes the blood to the pulmonary artery, goes to the lungs, and the lungs re-oxygenate it. Because on the right side of the heart, it's the blood that's come from the body to be cleaned up. So carbon dioxide is removed in the lungs, and oxygen is replaced. Replaces it. The left ventricle, and it's a much thicker wall. The right ventricle doesn't have to be a thick wall because it doesn't have far to push the blood. The lungs are very close. But the left one has to push strongly enough to go right through the whole body. So the left ventricle has to go, because it's got a thick wall, pushes into the aorta, which also has a thick wall, to be able to cope with the pressure that the left ventricle actually generates. And then it goes up to the head, the arms, the body, to the legs, and so on. So this gives you an idea of the signals. The signal here from the AV node, it's triggered, and it goes to the two atria to contract. Then it goes through the bundle of His and down there. Then various other fibers take it on, and the whole thing takes not very long. So if you've got a heart rate of, let's say 60, the whole, what you're basically measuring is ventricular contraction once a second. Every second it contracts once. Now, if you're walking fast or you're running and it's 120 heart rate, so it's contracting twice in a second. But the sequence of electrical charge and discharge can't change. You can't change. Otherwise, you're stuck. All right. So I should mention, notice that the wall here on our right, but the left of the heart, is much, much thicker than this wall here. All the diagrams should have that. Now, notice, so this is thicker than that. So basically, two atria, heart to the two ventricles out. So the blue one here goes to the pulmonary arteries, to the left and to the right, and then they come back through these pulmonary veins. As by the way, the word artery refers to blood going away from the heart, blood coming back into the heart. So it comes back, goes into the ventricles, and then this one here is the aortic arch. The first bit here goes back into the very first offshoot. It takes blood back into the heart itself. Okay, that's the most important bit to keep it going. The next one goes up to the carotid arteries, goes up to the brain. The next one from memory is the ones that goes to the arms, and the rest of the body. Okay, and that's basically it. When you get, is that the next one here? No. So when a doctor takes your blood pressure, he gives you two numbers. 120 on 80, for example. Now it measures in millimeters mercury, and they use millimeters mercury because that's what they had, and then it's normal. Today, I mean, most of us might have it at home. It's all done with air pressure, but the numbers refer to the pressure of compression. And if you've got high blood pressure and it shoots up to the high 100 or more, then you've got a problem, because the blood pressure, when it gets to the brain, could have nasty effects up there. But by the way, I don't know if you know, there's absolutely no blood in the brain itself. The brain is surrounded by 3 layers of membrane, and it's got its own circulation, which goes all the way down the bottom, along the spinal cord, the CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. So, and there's pumping system, and that's how everything gets nutrients and gases get moved around. And it's got nothing to do with anything at the moment. I just thought I'd mention it. Most people don't know that. So the the cardiac muscle itself, the fibrous non-conducting layer of tissue between the atria and the ventricles. I should go back along. No, this doesn't show it. So along here between the atria and the ventricles, there is a layer of tissue which stops, because when this contracts, you can't have it going and contracting down the bottom, because then the whole heart will contract simultaneously. So there's a layer of very special non-conducting tissue across there to stop the atrial contraction affecting the ventricles. Does that make sense? Okay, so here it is. There's a layer. The AV nodes, the SA node sends it off. The signal, these contract. The SA node, the AV node here, then sends it to the rest. But electrically, the top and the bottom of the heart are quite separate. So cardiac muscle is a syncytium. I mentioned that before. And the muscles overlap, and then they just carry the signal, the electrical signal through. So they all have to contract simultaneously. You can't have the atrial, for example, ones say, some of them contracting now, the others will wait a few milliseconds, and no, they all have to contract simultaneously. And by doing it together, that anatomic situation is called a syncytium. I mentioned that before. So the difference between oops, what have I done? The difference between the different muscle groups. This is a cardiac muscle. You can see that they are sort of interlinked, and whereas I can't read the label up the top, but I've got this thing across the. Hang on, I wonder if I can leave it up. Oh, here we are. Oh, sorry, that's cardiac microscopy. Okay, that's fine. I couldn't remember what that was. What wasn't the other sort of muscles. So you can actually see the intercalated discs, which stop movement and play with that. I've lost it. All right, so these are the fibers of the muscle, cardiac muscle, and they're quite different. And you see that everything's linked up to everything else. So they all can, or each group of muscles will contract simultaneously. I've got the time. Whole 1 minute 50. And
The heart is unique in that it never tires and is able to generate its own electrical impulses
without the need for stimulation from the central nervous system. The heart is said to be myogenic, meaning it is able to generate its own impulses.
These impulses are initiated at the sinoatrial node, or SA node, often referred to as the...
All right, it started going before I was ready. So, now, share screen. There's that. Oh. Here we go again. Why isn't it doing what I want it to do? Okay. Share screen. That's it there. Oh, here we are. I'll open it up.
The heart is unique in that it never tires and is able to generate its own electrical impulses without the need for stimulation from the central nervous system. The heart is said to be myogenic, meaning it is able to generate its own impulses. These impulses are initiated at the sinoatrial node, or SA node, often referred to as the heart's pacemaker. The SA node is a small mass of specialized muscle tissue found in the right atrial wall. When an electrical impulse is initiated, it sends a wave of excitation through the atria, causing the heart to contract. This is known as atrial systole. Eventually, the impulse reaches the atrioventricular node, or AV node. This is another specialized mass of tissue that electrically connects the right atrium and right ventricle. There is a slight delay as the impulse passes through the AV node to allow time for the atria to fully contract and fill the ventricles. The nerve impulse is then passed from the AV node down the septum. Specialized nerve tissues, called the bundle of His, conducts the impulse through the septum to the tip of the ventricles. The impulse is then passed on to smaller branches that spread through the wall of the ventricles and eventually reaches the Purkinje fibers. The Purkinje fibers conduct the impulse to the ventricles, causing ventricular systole, pumping blood out of the aorta and around the body. Learn more and test yourself with our simple online quizzes at teachpe.com.
Okay. So here's just a brief summary. So I think bits of trauma that I've been going through for the last week or so is starting to get me on. I feel I'm not thinking all that well. Anyway, the skeletal muscles, you saw that structure. Cardiac muscle where they're all interlinked, and then the smooth muscles were actually quite separate. They're next to each other there. Let's look at bones. So they actually hold the body together, and the bones come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So we have flat bone, like in the head. We have sesamoid bones, little ones, like the kneecap. We have little short bones in the hand, feet, long bones, irregular bones in the spine. And we have 206 bones in our bodies. Okay, so here I found one with the actual numbers. So in the skull, this is an adult, not a child. 22 in the skull, 33 in the vertebral column. In the shoulder girdle, there's 64 in the shoulder and the upper arms. In the thoracic cage, 25. In the pelvic girdle and arms and feet, 62. Now, in the bones, I've got layers and so on. It's solid with very small number of little canals in them to move things around. But the inside of the bone, it's called trabecular bone. It's hollow, and it has sort of a scaffolding or honeycomb, a good one. Now these spaces are filled with bone marrow. Now bone marrow are cells, actual cells, and they make our blood and some fat cells. Okay, so the bone is actually quite a complex process or system. So here we have the bone itself. Okay, this is the head. The bone itself is quite compact. The marrow's in there. It's got a really, really good blood supply. On the ends, it's spongy. And there's a thing called here on the left, you see an epiphyseal line, and that's the growth line. So we've stopped growing, all of us, but during the growth process, it's an extremely active area of the bone. And then you've got the blood vessels in and out of the bones. So the trabecular bone, that word's not here, but it's like that. It's like a honeycomb. That's what it looks like. So bones are actually quite the living, active tissue. It's constantly being remodeled. It means that it's being broken down and replaced, and new bones constantly being made. So what do they do? What do the bones do? They support our body structurally. They protect our vital organs. So, for example, the chest, you've got the heart and the lungs being protected. Allow us to move. Without the bones, impossible. They also provide the capacity to produce the marrow where the cells are produced. And they also act, the marrow is an area of storage of minerals, especially calcium. There's a huge supply of calcium in the bones. Just going back to the numbers, at birth, we have about 270 soft bones. And then they start fusing. That means they grow together. So, for example, the skull. Well, imagine the head trying to come through the birth canal. And because the bones are not joined together yet, there's cartilage between them. As they come through the birth canal, they're squashed together. So they have this capacity to the head become smaller for a short period of time. And then after a while, the head each section just grows into each other. So the femur or the thigh bone, if you like, is the biggest bone we've got. The smallest is the stapes, the one that looks like a stirrup in the middle ear. There are 3 bones there, and that's only 3 millimeters long, tiny. And they are mostly collagen, like the protein. It's a soft protein, and forms a framework around which calcium phosphate is put in by it's the cells produce it. It hardens the framework, gives it strength. So about 99% of our body's calcium is in our bones and teeth. Amazing. Okay. Now, bones also have an internal structure similar to the honeycomb thing I'm going to show you before, and they're rigid but very light. So the mechanical aspects of the bone are what humans try to copy when they build structures that are strong but don't have too many parts. They're not solid, they're open, but the struts and the shape and the sequence of them makes them strong. They're fairly light. Now, bones are not static. They don't just have developed and stay that way all the time. They are always maintained constantly. They're remodeled. And there are 3 main cell types. So a group of cells called osteo means bone, blasts of cells. So these osteoblasts, they make new bone. And when some of the bone that's a bit older needs repair, they do that. Some of the older bone is sometimes removed, and new bone cells are made again for that spot. There are osteocytes, and the blasts are a little different to the sites. Site is a cytology, is a study of cells, so bone cells. These are inactive osteoblasts, inactive, that maintain connection with other osteocytes and osteoblasts. But they are part of the communication system in the bone. It's a very complex system. Then we have a third one called osteoclasts. And these are large cells, and they have a number of nuclei. And their job is to break down the bones. So they're moving around, and they check out which bones are past the use-by date. They release enzymes, acids. They dissolve the minerals in those bones and digest them. And this, I don't know if you've heard this word before, is resorption, where the body, if you like, absorbs, and then we talk about the cells absorbing whatever they absorb back into itself. So that's called resorption. And the osteoclasts help remodel injured bones. So if you hurt your bone in some way, not necessarily breaking it, they're bruising it, and they'll sort that out. And they create pathways for nerves and the blood vessels, so all under control. And most people don't give this any thought at all. It's just an amazing system. Now, the marrow itself is almost, it's in most all bones, not all bones have that, where the spongy bone is present, called cancellous, not cancer, cancel. So it looks spongy. And it's responsible for making about, get this number, 2 million red blood cells every second. A decent factory. They also produce lymphocytes. They're the white blood cells. There's a whole stack of them there. Different lymphocytes, depending on what we're looking at. I go into lymphocytes in detail on another talk, and that's part of our immune system. Now, what sort of functions do bones actually have? There's a mechanical function, so they give us support. Muscles and tendons and ligaments are all attached to bones, and without anchoring to the bones, the muscles can't move. So we'll talk about that junction. Some bones protect the body's internal organs. So the skull protects the brain, the ribs, and protect the heart, the lungs. I mentioned that. Synthesizing. So the cancellous, the spongy bones, that produce our red blood cells, that produce our platelets, which are used in clotting, that produce our white blood cells, which are part of the immune system. It's all done there. And that metabolically, they store minerals, they store fat. In fact, marrow is very fatty. They control the pH balance in the body. There's a whole detoxification factory in there. So if we have some sort of chemicals that are not healthy to us, the blood going everywhere, and when it gets to the bone, it gets extracted and detoxified. It has endocrine function. It controls the body's calcium balance. Now, muscles cannot contract without calcium, but they're stored in the bone. Now, back to the type of the bones. The long bones, all right, they're compacted to be able to withstand every step we take. There's compression, long compression. If you fall over, you can easily snap your bones. And there's not much marrow in these long bones. So basically they support the weight of the body. So you're looking at the leg bones mostly, and the arm bones. If you want marrow, you go to the hip. There's a lot of marrow there, hip bones. Pelvis. The short bones, they have a thin layer of compact bone, and things like the wrist is large. This area of the hand, the wrist, but the hand's made of a large number of bones. They're all small bones. We have flat bones. They're thin, they're curved, and they have two outer layers of a compact bone and an inner layer of a spongy section. And things like the skull, that is made up when we're born. There's a whole stack of them in the head. They're all flat, slightly curved. Our sternum, our breastbone, and they have a protective role. The sesamoid bones, these are the bones that are actually part of the tendons, like our patella. So our kneecaps are inside the tendon. And so because we use our knees a lot, this system, wasn't humans, I'm sure, it was long before humans arrived, but because when you use your patella and the bones are moving around all the time to protect it from wear and tear, this system developed. We have irregular bones that don't fit any of the other categories. Things like in the spine, in the spine we've got all these vertebrae, and every one of them is different to every other. The pelvis, it's a one-off. It's and the pelvis is so designed is to protect reproductive and urinary areas. About 10% of our skeleton is replaced every year. So we have these cells we saw before then break down old bone and make new bone. And if there's some damage somewhere, it's done automatically. We don't have to control anything. And as the body grows from little kids up to adulthood, the skeleton is reshaped. Kids' bodies look different to our bodies, and they regulate calcium levels. So it's in the whole body. It's an amazing. And if one part of the skeleton is put under extra stress, then like sport, running, or exercising with weights, whatever it might be, the bone that's under stress will become thicker. There's more calcium, more bone strip material will be built around it. So if you're a runner, certain bones in the body which are affected by your feet hitting the hard concrete all the time, they will actually become thicker. Now, there are a number of hormones which are involved in all this. So the bone doesn't do it on its own. The bone has the cells in the bone don't actually control it. They just do what they're told to do. And that's where it actually happens. So a number of hormones like the parathyroids, and if you don't know about them, they're the ones that control calcium. The thyroid gland in the neck, 2 lobes, and then behind them, attached to them, are 2 tiny little, one on each side, glands called the parathyroid. And calcitonin, involved with calcium, vitamin D, estrogen in women, and testosterone is all part of this control system. Now, the bones have blood and nerve part of the control system. So there's a huge amount of blood that goes through the bones. And there are 2 types of vessels, the periosteal arteries. Now they flow with or next to the nerves. And the periosteum is the covering, it's the covering of the bones. And they also along there on the outside, just to help sort things out. And the veins carry blood away from the epiphyseal veins. They carry the blood away. And the nerves, which are there, now it's interesting, if you read this last bit here, it's a rich in sensory nerves, sensitive to tearing or tension. So the bone itself measures how much stress the bone is under and sends signals to the brain. Osteoporosis is a problem for many people where there's a reduction in bone density. And of course, the less dense the bone is, it's very easy to fracture the bone. It becomes, people say the bones have thinned, which is actually what happens. And because hormones affect, as we talked before, the actual bone itself, after menopause, when women's hormonal concentrations change, this is where osteoporosis could be a problem. But it can happen to premenopausal women and men. Men do have osteoporosis. Now, osteo means bone, porosis means holy, not as in church or synagogue, holy as in holes. And it occur. Osteoporosis can occur when there's removal, that means the cells move too much of the bone too quickly, or resorption back into the system, so it just becomes thinner, and the new bone can't form fast enough to replace it. So when there's a problem in communication with all those cells we talked about before, and more bone is removed, but not replaced quickly enough, then you have a problem. And it can be caused by having not enough calcium. You can have a vitamin D deficiency. You can have a problem with excessive alcohol. And they found recently that smoking also affects this. Not good. So here are 4 diagrams. The left one, normal bone. As the internal parts are slowly eaten away, and so the porosis means it becomes porous. And then because there's only a thin layer of bone, real bone that's left somewhere along here, a person can very easily break it. Okay, something different. There are 3 types of connective tissue in the body: tendons, ligaments, and cartilage. I mentioned this before. I'll give a bit more detail here. So these connective tissues, they're all made of cells. They all have these protein fibers, and then they also have an amorphous ground substance. Now, amorphous means no particular shape, shapeless, and ground substance is what the fibers sort of move through. It's just a material that's sitting there, and these fibers and the ground substance make up the extracellular matrix. Now, extracellular means outside the cell. It's not within the cell, it's outside the cell matrix. And it looks something like this. So there's cells there like blood cells. And that's a mast cell, and the mast cells control certain hormones. Lymphocytes, white blood cells. These are more white blood cells, plasma cells, neutrophils. So you've got these collagen fibers, collagen, okay, all over the place. And the whole thing is sitting in this, what they call ground substance. And that's all. It doesn't have a shape. It's just in there. Macrophages, by the way, are the big white blood cells that eat up whatever rubbish there is. Now I got a message. Someone said they want to ask a question, but when I clicked on it, it didn't show. Who was it? Did someone ask a question? Type it out.
I would like to ask a question if I can.
Sorry, say it again.
I would like to ask a question if I can.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Why, as one grows older, does one shrink and one gets smaller? One's frame gets a lot smaller.
Well, it's not two things. One is the bones don't change, but the cartilage, the bits between the bones, we get thinner, so you get shorter. And people's posture often change.
Yes.
So instead of standing up nice and straight, you might lean forward a bit. your knees might stay not straight.
Right.
You know, if you look at an old person walking down, well, none of us are old, but if you look at an old person walking down the street, look at their posture, and you'll see that they look smaller, but, and we only talk about a few centimeters, but they look smaller. And if you get them to stand up straight, you'd be surprised at how tall they are. But the soft tissue between the bones also sort of is eaten away.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that the bone structure itself doesn't get any shorter, because then the muscles won't work properly.
Right. Okay. I just think that as one gets older, one gets less active, and it does appear that you're shrinking.
I think the word is appear. I think a lot of it is down to posture.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Ruben, by taking additional calcium, does it help? As far as
well, the doctors, when you have your blood tests, every twice a year maybe, they usually measure that. Ask your doctor. If your calcium levels are low, yes.
Yeah, I am taking Actonel. Supposed to help with osteoporosis, but
okay. I don't know anything about that.
You don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, tendons, they attach muscles to bones, as we saw before, and they attach muscles to structures such as eyeballs. Now, there are no bones around the eyeballs, but if you know, each eyeball has 6 little muscles on it. And that's how we can look sideways, up and down, and our muscles and our eyes can go in a circle. 4 muscles would not do it. It has to be 6. And I didn't think of putting a structure, a photo in this of an eyeball, but they're very, very important. You get this attachment to the eyeballs. We have ligaments, and they attach bone to bone. So so that the bones just stay where they're meant to be. The ACL, for example, and PCL, if they weren't there, you could not walk. Cartilage, it's all over the place. It's like a pad between the bones. So cartilage is what's worn away between the bones, and once they're worn away, you wear the bones away, and that one, it's painful. I know, I've had both my knees replaced, and the technology is amazing. But you do walking bone and bone, you actually wear the bone down. And I've had it under control, and the doctor one day said, you've got to have the op now. You can't lose any more bone, because then we can't put the replacement in. Okay.
Sorry, Ruben?
Yeah.
Is there any way to protect the cartilage and not get it worn down?
Is there reason to protect it?
Is there any way to protect the cartilage to reduce the wearing down?
I can't think of anything. No, I don't think so. It just depends on the individual. Mine was different. I was at school and I fell down a couple of steps and snapped my anterior cruciate, but they didn't fix it for a long time, and so my walking was uneven. So my left knee was wearing the cartilage down because it wasn't the right straight on shape. And because I was walking unevenly on the left, it affected the right as well.
Yeah.
So for a normal person who hasn't snapped anything, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, because generally, you know, by the age of 70 or something, the knees, the cartilage between the knees goes, and that's where most people will go and have knee replacement or operation on the knees. So I was just, yeah, wondering whether there was any way to reduce the wear and tear, or keep it strong so that you don't need to replace the replacement.
I really don't know. I
Okay.
can't think of what would do it.
Okay, thank
I
you.
know the anatomy pretty well, but I don't know if there's something new that you can do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now you've all heard of sciatica, and you may have had sciatica. It's a nerve pain, and it's a there's a nerve that comes from the spinal cord out. Oh, here you can see in the diagram here, and it goes down the leg. Now, if cartilage is worn away, or because there are discs between the vertebrae, if they're worn away, then or you have some damage and you get a bulge like this one, there's pressure on this nerve, and I can tell you it's very painful. And as you can see in this diagram, it depends on where the pressure is. It could be anywhere down in different parts of the leg or the whole leg. It's but that's called sciatica. There's okay, so you get a herniated disc. So the disc actually is pushed into the nerve. So there's an operation that they do get rid of that, but sometimes they can't. Oh, and we're done. Okay, guys, thus endeth the lesson.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wish
very
it on
interesting.
live for tomorrow, for
Sorry.
Wednesday.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's, yeah, tomorrow lunchtime.
Yeah. And
Okay.
all the best.
Yeah.
Rubens,
Yeah.
thank you for coming back to me about the uric acid issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least we know. I don't know if it can help. We know.
Yeah, I made a note about how the energy is transferred, because energy itself is it's not something that you can grab. I mean, you can touch. You get a. I haven't got a battery in front of me, but you know you can put your finger at the top and bottom of a battery, and if your fingers are wet, there'll be a link. You probably won't feel it. It's only 1.5 volts, but I really don't know how chemical energy is released from these ATP molecules. I know it happens, and you know, ever since I was at uni, and that was a couple of years ago, but things may have come through which I don't know. I've never, or maybe it's my brain that I just can't remember. That I don't know. But I hope today's effort will, you may have realized or learned something new about parts of the body that people don't normally talk about.
That's right. Definitely.
Yeah.
So we expect over 70 that is something not right, yeah?
Can I say something, Ruben?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm over 72.
Yes.
70 also.
I know. I am just on 80.
But all of us.
Yeah, we're getting.
So long as you're feeling healthy, and you can walk about with we do 5-6K every day, unless it's too hot or too wet. keep yourself busy.
Hopefully,
Active.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing, Ruben?
Sorry, Basil?
Can I say one thing?
You can say anything.
I remember you once told us, and I think it's worthwhile speaking about it again. With evolution, all man and animals have got the same number of bones. Correct? And fish.
No, not quite. Oh, yeah, yes,
Like
yes. All right. The
camels,
bones, yes. There are a couple of giraffes that are a little bit different, but
close to.
yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
Hmm.
Now, I get a daily science email, and in yesterday's there was an article that they found a skull in Turkey some years back, and they finally worked out that it's about 7.8, something like that, million years old. And it's now the rethinking the evolution of man, not starting in Africa, but starting in sort of Central Asia, of the Asian, Turkey, that area, and then they moved south to, maybe the weather changed and they moved south to Africa and evolved from there. So that really is putting a big stress on the teaching of evolution with respect of where things started rather than continued. Because there are lots of plants and animals that originated in Asia that due to, we think, climate change, gradually moved down to Africa where it was more stable. And then perhaps moved, but man was a much later invention.
Wow.
And
We're all Turkish by the sound of it.
Yeah. well, no, but modern man, Homo sapiens, I think it's pretty definite that we started in Africa, developed in Africa. There's just so much information, but the guys who came before that.
Right.
Anyway, I don't know. Anyway, big day tomorrow, so
yes,
yeah,
it's hard. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling tired.
Yes,
I can imagine.
Because I'm also the executor, so I do all the paperwork at the time. So in about an hour, the undertaker's coming to do the paperwork.
oh dear.
It's a bit of love is
A better lump, yeah.
yeah, that's it's not February Kadisha, it's the other one. It's part of the liberal group.
I remember, I remember, Ruben, that your aunt came to all your lectures in
Yes, she did.
Glenara.
She didn't understand a word, I'm sure, but she just wanted to be there. I was cleaning out her, remember, I used to give out notes. I used to print them off and give them out. We were cleaning her place, her unit out before we sold it, and I found piles of my notes just sitting there.
Oh my God.
And by the way, I'm really considering next year doing it face to face. It's, for me as a teacher, I much prefer to see your faces and reactions, and when you're almost asleep. And but I don't know if I need to also continue doing it online at the same time. And Basil told me that the guy in Stonington does that
often, and it's very popular. And
I'm not quite sure how that can work.
In some cases, like there was one to do with Jewish religion. There was something like 80 people, and about 70% were online.
Ah, okay. Oh, that's kind of the current affairs.
Yes, at Stonington, yes. That would have been, well, it was, no, not current affairs. That was to do with the evolution of the Jewish people from Spain. I just can't think of his name.
Yeah.
we've had 6 courses over the last 6 years, lasting 6 lessons each for 1.5 hours.
Okay. Well, if I do it, I'll probably do.
I could put you onto the right people.
Yeah, well, I'll continue my fortnightly
Mm.
thing. Anyway, so guys, I'll say farewell until next fortnight.
Thank you.
Have a good Yontif and all the best.
A good Yontif, exactly.
Yes,
And
have a
take
good
it
Yontif.
easy. Take it easy.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
All
will
the
see
very
you next
best.
time.
Well,
Thank
All
you.
the best.
thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.